The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing that night, tearing at the pine roof of Eli Mercer's cabin with fingers made of ice and fury. He sat close to the iron stove, pushing a three-cornered needle through torn leather, while the coffee pot bubbled black and bitter on top. Outside, the storm had been building since noon, and now it howled through the valley like every demon of winter had been set loose at once. The first knock at the door was so faint he thought it was only a branch beating against the wood. The second was louder, and it made him set aside the leather. No one traveled in weather like this, unless death was chasing them. And death usually won such races. Eli took his Winchester from the wall, checked the chamber, and moved to the door. "Who's there?" he called. A thin voice, weak but clear enough to hear through the storm, answered, "Please help," a woman's voice, worn ragged by wind and fear. Eli pulled open the door, and the storm nearly ripped it from his hands. A figure stood on his threshold, wrapped in a frozen wool dress, stiff as wood, hair covered in ice that might once have been auburn, one hand clutching a small carpet bag like it held her last hope in this world. She looked half dead already. He didn't waste time with questions. Questions could wait until a body was saved. He grabbed her arm, thin even through the heavy fabric, and pulled her inside, slamming the door shut against the storm's fury. She shook so hard her teeth rattled, lips pale enough to scare him. He took down his spare flannel shirt, thrust it toward her without turning change. Wet clothes will kill you quicker than a bullet. She dropped the carpet bag, fought with the frozen buttons, and slipped into the shirt that hung almost to her knees. Eli fed wood into the stove until the flames roared, then wrapped her in a thick blanket from his bed. He set a tin cup of coffee in her hands, though they trembled so much she could barely lift it. Slowly, color began to return to her face. When the soup was ready, beans, pork, and what vegetables he had left from the cellar, she ate like someone who had forgotten what food was. Only when she set the empty bowl aside did he ask, "Why are you here?" Her eyes met his, green as summer sage under the shadows of exhaustion. "Owen Blackledge brought me from Boston to be his wife. At the crossroads he looked at me once and decided I wasn't suitable for ranch life. He gave me coach fare back east and left me there." Eli knew Owen Blackledge well. The man owned the largest spread in the valley, ran cattle and men with the same heavy hand, and never made a move that didn't profit him. Eli also knew the crossroads she mentioned, 3 miles away through killing weather. "You walked from there in this storm." She nodded, her fingers clumsy as she pulled an envelope from her bag. "There's no coach until the storm clears." "Could be a week," the station master said. "I didn't have enough for a room and meals, so I walked." Her voice didn't shake, though her body still did. "Eli respected that you were a mail-order bride," he said flatly. "Was. Now I'm just someone who sold everything to marry a stranger who took one look and decided against the purchase." The wind screamed outside, rattling the shutters like bones. Eli stoked the fire and turned back to her. "My name's Eli Mercer. This is my place. You're welcome to shelter here until the weather breaks." "Margaret Doyle," she answered. "Voice steadier now, Maggie, if you like." She glanced around the one-room cabin, neat and spare, tools hung on pegs, a rifle over the door, a bed in the corner. "I can work for my keep, cook, clean, sew. I won't be a burden." Nobody's talking about burden. In a storm like this, it's just Christian duty to give shelter. She gave a bitter half-smile. "Mr. Blackledge goes to church every Sunday," I'm told. Eli didn't reply. Owen's religion was Owen's business, but he knew the man's true ways. Instead, he pointed to the bed. "You'll take that. I'll sleep by the stove." "I couldn't." "You can, and you will. I've slept on harder ground plenty of times." For a long moment, she stood straight despite the blanket, dignity holding her up where strength might fail. Then she said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Eli, no need for formal here." He busied himself banking the fire, barring the door and readying the cabin for the night. When he finally rolled up in his buffalo robe by the stove, he could hear her breathing in the bed. Still shaky, but steady enough to mean she might live. The storm clawed at the cabin, testing every seam and nail but the little home held. Eli had built it with his own hands, meant for weather like this. Somewhere in the dark, her voice came soft, almost shy. "Why didn't you ask more questions about why he really sent me away?" Eli stared at the glow of the stove. "Because I know Owen Blackledge. He doesn't do anything without profit in mind. If he turned you out, it wasn't because you're unsuitable. It was because something else changed in his plans." Silence filled the room, broken only by the howl of wind and the groaning of the timbers. Then, in the smallest whisper, she asked, "You think I'm pretty?" Eli's jaw tightened. "I think you're alive. And in a storm like this, that's what matters." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. He didn't turn to look. Some things a person had to do alone, even when they weren't alone. As dawn crept gray across the mountains, the storm eased. Eli rose, rebuilt the fire, and set coffee to boil. She stirred, sitting up in his bed with his mother's quilt wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Storm's breaking," he said without turning from the stove. "But roads won't be clear for days yet. I should try to. You should eat breakfast and stop talking foolish. Nobody's going anywhere for a while." She came to the table barefoot, still in his shirt under the quilt, her chestnut hair drying in unruly waves around her shoulders. They ate in silence, biscuits and gravy, coffee black as midnight. When she stood to clear the plates, her movements were steady, practiced, like she'd been doing it all her life. "I meant what I said about working," she told him, warming water for washing. "I won't take charity. Everybody works here. That's just living." Through the frost-etched window, the world outside lay buried in white, cut off from everything. Might as well have been the last two people alive. Eli Mercer knew then, as sure as he knew the sound of a storm coming down the valley, that his life had just changed. The storm kept them prisoner for days. Snow pressed against the cabin walls, sealing them inside like a tomb. Except for the steady heat of the stove and the quiet rhythm of two strangers learning to share the same space. Maggie moved through his cabin as if she belonged there, though Eli knew she was only trying to earn her keep. She mended shirts that had been torn and patched too many times, set bread starter to bubbling in a crock by the stove, and swept the floor until the pine planks showed their grain again. She was a Boston schoolteacher by her own words, but she handled work like this with steady hands and a straight back. At night, when the cold grew sharp enough to make nails pop from the walls, Eli let her take the bed. He spread his buffalo robe by the stove and listened to her soft breathing. On the coldest night, when her teeth chattered loud enough to keep him awake, he finally made a decision. "I'm going to sit on the bed," he said, dragging the buffalo robe with him. "On top of the covers, just for warmth. Body heat's better than freezing separate." For a moment, there was silence, then she whispered, "All right." He sat beside her, both of them wrapped in the heavy hide. She trembled against him like a spooked colt. Slowly, he put an arm around her shoulders, just enough to share warmth. It wasn't a husband's touch, not yet, but it kept them both alive. By dawn, she had fallen asleep against him, her head resting on his shoulder. When she woke, she pulled away quick, but her cheeks were pink, and there was no shame in her eyes, only something unspoken. The days slipped into a quiet rhythm. He taught her how to check the cattle, to read signs of a calving cow. She taught him how to keep the stove at the right temperature for baking bread. They ate side by side, their hands brushing now and then, neither pulling away as fast as before. On the third day, she pulled a bundle of letters from her carpet bag and spread them on the table. "He wrote me these," she said. 2 months of promises. Eli read them slowly, the fancy words written in Owen Blackledge's heavy script. Promises of a good home, respect, even love. Then she handed him the last letter, the one written at the crossroads, ending it all with the word unsuitability. "Unsuitable," Eli muttered. His gray eyes studied her face, her steady hands, the set of her jaw. "You're more suited to this life than half the women I've ever known." But Maggie shook her head. He wanted something else. "Something I'll never understand." "Profit," Eli said flatly. Everything with Owen comes down to profit. Don't fool yourself into thinking it was about you." The fire snapped in the stove. Maggie folded the letters carefully, like she couldn't quite bring herself to destroy them, though they had burned through her life already. That night, she whispered across the dark cabin, "What if he comes looking for me?" Eli's voice was calm, steady. "Then he'll find you here, safe and warm. A man can't throw something away, then claim it back when it suits him." "I'm not something to be claimed. No," Eli said. "You're not. That's what he's going to learn if he shows his face here." And show his face he did. 2 mornings later, Eli spotted riders coming down the trail. 4 men. At the front rode Owen Blackledge, tall in the saddle, his silver-studded bridle flashing in the weak sunlight. Beside him rode Sheriff Amos Hale, and behind them, 2 hired hands. Eli stepped onto the porch, his rifle leaning casual against the wall. "No need to start a fight, but no harm in being ready, Eli," Owen said, touching the brim of his hat like they were neighbors meeting polite. "Heard you've been harboring stolen property." "Nothing stolen here," Eli answered, voice even, only shelter given in a storm. "My bride went missing." Owen said, "Word is she's here." The cabin door opened behind Eli. Maggie stepped out, her blue wool dress freshly brushed, her auburn hair pinned neat. She stood tall, straight as a rifle barrel, and spoke clear enough for the whole valley to hear, "I am not your bride, Mr. Blackledge. Not now, not ever." Owen's face turned red, his hand drifting close to his gun belt. "I paid for your passage. That makes you mine under law." Maggie held up the paper he had given her at the crossroads. "Your own words say otherwise. Agreement terminated. No further obligation on either party." Sheriff Hale read the paper slow, lips moving over the words. Finally, he looked up. "Seems clear enough. Owen, you released her yourself." "She tricked me." Owen spat threatened scandal. "I never threatened you," Maggie said, cold as ice. "You simply looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the trouble." The 2 hired hands shifted uneasily. One of them spat tobacco into the snow, but the younger man looked ashamed. The sheriff's hand stayed close to his holster, ready if tempers flared. Eli stepped forward, planting himself between Maggie and the riders. "She's here by her own choice. You've got no claim." Owen's eyes narrowed, hate burning in them. "What will folks say, Eli? You, alone in this cabin with another man's discarded bride." "Let them talk," Eli said. "Won't change the truth." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Doyle, are you here of your own free will?" "Yes." "Anyone forcing you to stay?" "No one." "Anyone taking liberties?" Her voice carried firm and steady. "Mr. Mercer has treated me with more respect than any man since I left Boston." For a moment, Owen's hand hovered over his gun. Eli's hand shifted toward his rifle. The winter air froze heavy between them. Then Sheriff Hale spoke, his voice like a gavel. "This is a civil matter, not criminal. Far as the law is concerned, Miss Doyle is free." Owen's jaw worked. "This isn't over." He yanked his reins, turning his horse. Snow sprayed as he rode off, his hired men trailing behind. The sheriff lingered, his face weary. "Eli, you've made an enemy." "Owen won't let this rest." "He already made himself my enemy," Eli said. The sheriff looked at Maggie, softer than Miss Doyle. "You've got grit. But grit alone won't keep you safe. Be careful." When he rode away, the valley fell silent again, broken only by the wind. Maggie's hands were trembling now, though her face had stayed steady. "You did good," Eli told her. "Stood your ground. I was terrified, didn't show. That's what matters." But both of them knew Owen Blackledge was not finished. The days after Owen's visit were quiet, but not peaceful. Eli kept a watchful eye on the fences in the barn, knowing Owen Blackledge wasn't the sort to walk away. Maggie went about her work, teaching herself the rhythms of frontier life, but her eyes often lingered on the trail, waiting for more trouble. Trouble came one night in the form of fire. Eli woke to the smell of smoke and the orange glow flickering against the cabin walls. He threw open the door to find his barn in flames, the dry timbers roaring like a furnace. He shouted for Maggie, and together they ran into the cold night. "Buckets!" he called, racing toward the creek. But he knew before he even started the line of water that the barn was lost. The fire had taken it too fast. All they could do was keep it from spreading to the cabin. Maggie grabbed a shovel and began beating back sparks that leapt toward the grass. Her blue wool dress tore, her hands blistered, but she didn't stop. By dawn, the barn was nothing but smoking rubble. The cattle had been spared, but half the hay was gone, and so were tools Eli had built up over years. Maggie stood by the ruins, soot streaked across her face, her eyes burning. "This was him," she said. "Eli didn't argue Owen sent the fire, but we'll rebuild." Maggie's voice shook with anger. "He wants to break us." "He won't," Eli said firmly. "Not unless we let him that morning." She surprised him. "Teach me to shoot." Eli studied her, the schoolteacher from Boston, standing in his snowy yard with her chin high. "You sure?" Quote, "If I'm staying here, I need to be more than someone you protect. I need to stand with you." So he set a tin can on a post behind the cabin and handed her his Winchester. Her hands trembled at first, but he guided her grip. His voice calm and patient. "Breathe out slow. Don't pull the trigger. Squeeze it." The shot rang out sharp, echoing through the valley. She missed wide, but her jaw tightened with determination. Again and again she tried, until finally she clipped the edge of the can. Her smile at that small victory made Eli's chest tighten in a way the fire never had. By the end of the week, Maggie could hit the target more often than not. Eli nodded in approval. "Not bad for a Boston teacher." "Not bad for anyone," she said, and he had to agree. But gossip traveled faster than fire. Word spread through the valley that Eli Mercer had stolen Owen Blackledge's bride, that Maggie Doyle was living in sin under his roof. Some neighbors turned their backs, others offered quiet support. One Sunday, Reverend Cole asked Maggie to speak before the congregation. The church was full, Owen sitting proud in the front pew, his jaw clenched tight. Maggie walked to the front, her patched dress neat, her head high. She told him everything. The letters, the promises, the abandonment at the crossroads. She held up Owen's own paper, the one that freed her of all obligation. Her voice was steady, her truth clear. "Mr. Mercer saved my life. He has shown me only respect. If there is sin in this, it is not his." The room stirred. Some frowned, some whispered, but others nodded. Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife, stood first. "This young woman has tended the sick and taught children since she arrived. That's more Christian than lies." One by one, others followed. Old Tom Garrett, then young Mrs. Johnson, until Owen's face burned red with fury. He stormed out, his boots striking hard against the floorboards. But Maggie stood taller for having told her story. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Eli brought out a small wooden box. Inside lay a thin gold ring, smooth with age. "It was my mother's." He said, "I'm not asking you to wear it yet, but I want you to have it, to know it's yours when you're ready." Maggie's eyes softened as she touched the ring. "It's beautiful." "It's simple," Eli said, and simple things last week's past. Spring came with green grass and calves in the fields. The barn was rebuilt with neighbors' help. Maggie became the valley's teacher, her lessons filling the church hall until the day a real schoolhouse was built. She and Eli grew close not through grand declarations, but through daily work shared. Bread baked, fences mended, storms weathered. One warm morning, with wildflowers blooming along the creek, they stood under the cottonwood tree above Sweetwater and spoke vows before Reverend Cole and the gathered community. Maggie wore her blue dress, patched so many times it had its own history stitched into the seams. Eli wore his one good shirt, his boots shined. "I do," he said. "Sure as sunrise I do," she answered, her voice clear and strong. When he kissed her, the cheers of neighbors rose like a hymn. From that day forward, the cabin was no longer just Eli's, it was theirs. A home built not of wood and nails alone, but of trust, born in a storm and love that had weathered fire, gossip, and the pride of a man who had thrown away what he would never have again. And when nights grew cold, Eli no longer lay by the stove alone. Maggie slept beside him, her hand in his, their breaths warm in the dark. They had been two strangers in a blizzard. Now they were husband and wife, bound by choice, by courage, and by the quiet power of love that grows strongest when the world tries hardest to tear it down.